handle the truth.
Welcome to The Truth Hurts. This is your host, Sule Prince. Sule Prince.
Johnny, that really hurt.
Whether you like it or not, sometimes the truth hurts. The truth hurts. And you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. Will set you free.
Today, I have a very special guest with me today, Dale Glover, and we are going to discuss a very interesting topic. We are going to discuss the Shroud of Turin. Now, many of you probably don't know this topic. You probably have heard of it, but never researched it deeply, or you may never have heard of the topic at all whatsoever. Well, we have Dale here to help us understand this topic and why it is important. But what about the dating of the shroud? Doesn't it date to the medieval period around the 14th century? And is that a concern for us that the dating is so late?
So absolutely, it can be a concern, right? Because if we're claiming it covered Jesus historically, and we find out it's it dates to the medieval period, well, those don't match. Jesus lived in 30 AD, not in the medieval time. So there is a problem for a lot of people. Now, if you do you mind if I answer before I get into my answer on the carbon dating? Can I add something that's not on the list there that might be interesting?
Yeah.
Okay, so don't blame pro shroud people for this. This is my unique idea. So I'm the idiot if this sounds dumb, but I actually believe I argue that the dating of the shroud is totally irrelevant with respect to the question. So pretend it is medieval. I don't care. That's great. I can still prove those images were formed miraculously. And since they depict Jesus and represent his death and resurrection, we still have a miracle attesting to those events, even if it dates to the medieval period. That's something that a lot of people don't go for. But if you think about it, why couldn't God perform a miracle authenticating Christianity and create miraculous images at any period in human history? There's nothing implausible. I mean, some people, I don't know if you're a cessationist on your end, but some people see no issue with God doing miraculous healings and that sort of thing today, or, that sort of thing. So I don't think there's anything implausible, at least about saying, well, maybe God did create a medieval miracle, miraculous image kind of thing. Now,
so are you saying God created a miraculous image that lasted to this medieval period?
So no. What I'd be saying is that in the medieval period, God, created these images for one reason or another. He created these miraculous images on this linen cloth. So I get that's totally ad hoc and that sort of thing. But I'm just saying, even if a worst case scenario, we do prove the shroud's medieval, that does not, the scientific evidence that these are miraculous images is exactly the same. Okay, so let me put that controversial idea to the side.
Well, hold on. Before
sure.
you get into you're getting controversial there, I can see a person asked the question, what would be the point of God making this image appear so many years later, instead of from that distinct point in time?
So we can only speculate as to God's motivations, but obviously we know God is omniscient, and in his providence, he does a whole bunch of things throughout history for reasons that we don't fully comprehend in the moment. So, but one reason would be to provide miraculous evidence of the death and resurrection of Jesus, that God would know would be studied in the 20th century and lead me in part to faith. And maybe these images were needed in the medieval period for that same purpose, because we know that a lot of people did come to faith through seeing the shroud exhibited in the Leary Chapel and stuff like that. So, again, my answer is just, sorry?
That's your idea.
Yes, that's my idea. Nobody else argues for this kind of thing. So let's put that to the side. I only submit that as a worst case scenario. What do the actual facts say? And here's the good news. The shroud isn't medieval. It does date to the first century to Jesus. So we don't even need to worry about that kind of speculation. But there is carbon dating that happened in 1988. And unfortunately, that did date the shroud to the medieval period. Now, the issue with that is that we found out afterwards that the carbon dating was done unreliably. You can't, it proves nothing, literally nothing, because what happened is the carbon-14 scientists at the time, first of all, they only dated one sample location. That's not good enough, right? Because there could be contamination in that area. There could be something going on with that area of the cloth.
Yeah.
And that's why you need to test different areas of the shroud to prevent that. Secondly, we know that they eliminated the outliers in their dates. So they got about 16. Oh, sorry. They got a bit.
Yeah.
All right. They got 16 subsample results because when they get their samples, they cut it up into smaller pieces for the testings. So they got 16 dates, but they only reported 12 of them at the time. Well, what happened to the other 4? Why did they eliminate those? Oh, because those were outside the range within the medieval period that they needed to get. Meaning it was dating, in one case, it dated younger to the 1400s. Another one was earlier than the medieval thing. And so they just eliminated that and said, oh, we'll just pretend those didn't happen. We'll just assume those are random measurement errors. But statisticians have studied that and proven those are not random measurement errors. They're actually indicative of a systematic bias. There's something systematically creating an error in the results they got. Something's affecting those carbon dates.
Okay.
Now, what that is, scientifically, we don't know. But what a good hypothesis is what I was talking about with Bob Rucker, because remember, if particle radiation formed the images with protons, we know that that would also emit neutrons, and neutrons affect carbon-14 dates. And it just coincidentally, when he calculated this out, he proved that if the shroud was from 30 AD and got neutron irradiated at the time of Jesus' resurrection, we would precisely get the exact dates and the range of dates and the slope of dates that we obtained from the carbon-14 dating. So it all matches and checks out. One last thing I'll say on the carbon dating, this will be new for you, but I think it'll be interesting. So in 1973, believe it or not, 1988 is not the only time the shroud was carbon dated.
Okay.
In 1973, they removed a sample from the same area, around the same area, called the Reyes sample. Now, they carbon dated that part of the shroud, and guess what they got? 1st century AD, the time of Jesus.
Wow.
Now that carbon-14 dating process was also flawed, and that's why nobody mentions it and stuff like that. There was problems with the procedure there, but if you're going to take one flawed carbon-14 dates, then I'll just pick the one that dates to the 1st century then. So, yeah.
That is good. Let me ask you a question. When it comes to this image, why do we want to assume that the image is Jesus and not somebody else?
That's a great question. So I think it's clear from the contextual indicators. And first, let me say this. Look, everyone with half a functioning brain, even shroud skeptics, sometimes you wonder about atheists, but or some of them, but even they will admit this is clearly Jesus. Even if you think it's an artwork, it's a picture of who? Of Jesus, right?
Okay.
So nobody actually denies that this is of Jesus. Maybe you'll get Matt Dillahunty, but who cares about that guy? And you can tell, look, from the wounds himself, you can tell he's got all of these scourges that look like they're consistent with a Roman flagrum weapon. You've got a spear wound in the side with blood and a clear liquid or flowing out, just like the Gospel of John describes for Jesus. He's crucified, and the nail wounds are in the 1st century accurate location. So the nails are coming out of the wrist, not the palms of the hands, which is what medieval people always depicted Jesus' crucifixion as. And then you have the crown of thorns. And clearly you can tell from anatomically, this is a Jewish man of Semitic descent and stuff like that. So put the pieces together. Who does that sound like? So we have someone who matches the description of Jesus's death as described in the Gospels and his pre-death treatment. But here's something else. How does it imply the resurrection? So it's not just the death, but the resurrection's proven, because we see evidence. And my friend Teddy Pappas just published a paper on this where she references a 150-year meta-study on rigor mortis.
Okay.
And she proves meticulously that man in the shroud is still in rigor mortis.
Wow.
And and there's no signs of a buildup of decomposition liquids or putrefaction on the shroud. What does that mean? Somehow that body was removed from the cloth before he lost rigor mortis, before he decomposed to the point where there would be the liquids and stuff like that, and somehow left miraculous images within a matter of days. And within the Jerusalem area, if it was in there, it would have to be within 3 days or so, right? Who does that sound like?
Mm-hmm.
That sounds like Jesus' death and resurrection. So, yeah.
And so all these images you're saying is on the shroud, the scourging, the spear, the nails in the wrists and in the feet. That's all there.
Yep, it's all there. And, there's something like 130 scourge wounds on the frontal image alone and like over 200 on the back.
Wow.
That have all been identified. But guess what? You can't see that with the naked eye. It's only identifiable on the photographic negative images. If a medieval artist, why would he paint invisible wounds that you can't see with your eyes?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's a good argument. Yeah, that's a good argument. So what about the Darcy Memorandum? Didn't some medieval bishops inquiry prove that the shroud was painted by an artist in the year 1350?
He did not prove. So I would say actually the opposite. So what the Darcy Memorandum here, this is something that'll be new for you, Sule, but and I'll talk about this in my part 2 Bible study. But so Bishop Darcy, he was a bishop living in Troyes in France around 1389. And he allegedly wrote a memo to the Pope complaining about the church in Leary showing the shroud and making money off of it to pilgrims, right? And he was saying, it's all about greed. It's a fake and all this stuff. And as proof that it's a fake, my predecessor, the guy who was the bishop before me, a guy named Bishop Henry de Portier, held an official inquiry. And at that inquiry, the artist or an artist came up and confessed that the shroud images were painted. So that's what the memo itself is. And shroud skeptics appeal to this as kind of damning evidence. See, that's proof it's medieval. It came into existence in France in the 1350s. Now, here's the problem. So there's several problems. Just analyzing this as a historical document. Secular historians don't accept this as an authentic document. First of all, we have several other documents from the Pope, the King, and including a letter from Bishop Henry himself. They're all signed and dated. This is not signed and dated as the official stamp is. So people don't think this was even ever sent in the first place. Our earliest manuscripts of this alleged memo come from the 1800s. We have no mention of this memo in any of the external documents from the period or from historians cataloging the period afterwards. Even more importantly, what about the contents of the memo? There's no official records in any of the letters we have, all of them signed and dated from the Pope, from the King of France, everyone involved in this controversy. There's no mention of an inquiry at all. There's no mention of the shroud being a fake at all and stuff like that. The only thing we have from the time is Bishop Henry, right? So the Darcy, the guy he was talking about, and it was written 3 months before he died. Mm-hmm. And at the end of his life, what is he writes a letter to the Leary Church. And what is he saying? Is he saying, you fraudulent people, you're showing a fake shroud? No. He says, I approve and ratify of everything you guys are doing with your divine cult at that church. So this directly contradicts what this Bishop Darcy guy said. So it's complete bunk. And, just for some irony, one of the letters we do have is from the Pope telling this Bishop Darcy guy to shut his mouth or he'll be excommunicated forever. So yeah, it's not good evidence.
Okay, that's good. Let's get into some characteristics. The person where the image on the shroud, which we believe is Jesus, what was the height of this individual?
So we don't know precisely because we don't know about the treatment of the cloth. There may be stretching, and there definitely is some stretching and stuff. But the best estimates that we have is he's about 5'9". So that's trying to take into account some stretching and stuff like that. So plus or minus a couple of 1 or 2 inches.
Okay. Now, in our personal conversation, you had stated that the artworks that you see in history of Jesus were based on the image made on the shroud. That's correct?
Yep, that's one. Yep, that's exactly one of the arguments. Yep.
Okay, so people would have issue because when you see the person on the shroud, he apparently has long hair, and he looks like he's Caucasian. Is there any concern with that?
So in terms of the long hair, there's zero concern at all because it's false to say that that's a medieval conception. People in the ancient Jews in the first century did have long hair, quote unquote, long hair. But by long hair, that means shoulder length. That was considered short back then. That wasn't an issue for Jewish people in the first century, as all biblical scholars will attest. And I've even found archaeological depictions of Jews with shoulder length hair. So the long hair is not an issue at all. That's absolutely indicative of a first century Jew. It's also consistent with the medieval guy. Now, in terms of him being did you want to follow up on that? Or?
Yeah. With the hair. So you had explained, so I want you to tell our audience when Paul talks about it is shameful for a man to have long hair. And then now we are seeing in history that the Jews potentially had long hair. How do we reconcile that difference?
Yeah, so Paul in 1 Corinthians, Paul kind of says, like, doesn't nature tell us it's a shame for a man to have long hair? So in the first place, the key there is, well, what do you mean by long, right? You can't use a 1950s definition of long hair to define what was short versus long in the first century. But more importantly, that the word that Paul uses, the Greek word that he's using there, he's obviously talking about hairstyles, not even necessarily the length of hair there. So the issue was that, men and women, he wanted to prevent them from dressing up like women or wearing their hair like the other sex. No, you're clearly a man. This is what's appropriate for men to have in this culture. This is what's appropriate for women and stuff like that. You're to conform to those standards. He's totally against transgenders and stuff. Mm-hmm. The other thing you mentioned is about he looks like a white guy, a white man. So absolutely he doesn't. I'm always confused by this because I've never seen it kind of thing, right? Personally. So he doesn't look white at all. But the ethnologists who've actually studied him, I think a guy named Dr. Carlton Coons and stuff, I've quoted him. And everyone who studies the man, it's perfect. He's consistent with modern day Shepherdic Jews as well as ancient Jews of a Shepherdic variety. So he fits in within the Semitic race. And this isn't just human beings who studied this. There's been a computerized anthropometric study that's been done that also shows Jesus to be consistent with those of a Semitic race. He's not Caucasian in any way. So, yeah.
I used to go to New York when I was in my teen years. I used to go there a lot. And we would have these groups of they're Black nationalists and Black religion, the Nation of Islam, the Nation of God on Earth. You'd have the Black Hebrew Israelites. And these groups disdain white people. And one thing that they would always shout is you're your blue-eyed, blonde-haired Jesus that you guys worship.
Yeah.
So in our conversation that we had together, which was a shock to me, is that you're saying there were people in the time of Jesus that could potentially have had blonde hair.
Yeah, or I think light brown hair and stuff like that. So it was a mixed. Remember, we're talking about the Roman Empire, and there were centuries before that of mixed breeding and stuff like that. Whether, we like to pretend that the Israelites followed the Old Testament, but we know they didn't. They repeatedly mixed in with the pagan cultures and stuff. So by the time of the Roman Empire, yes, genetically speaking, we know that there could be easily people with light brown hair and stuff like that. Now, look, Jesus, they were Jewish. They were Middle Eastern descent. They didn't have Caucasian white skin. We need to be, I don't want to support any white supremacy nor black supremacy. Jesus wasn't black either. He was Middle Eastern. Okay. So we just got to be real. But that doesn't mean that, he had to have black hair or dark hair. No, genetically speaking, it is possible. And what I found remarkable, I didn't know about until I studied this for our class there, is that the only known hair sample we have from the first century in Judea actually proves that Jews had red hair, Irish red hair. And that was a shock to me. So it's just ironic that the only hair we have preserved from the first century, the guy was a redhead. We had a Jewish redhead. So yeah, you can't make those easy assumptions, I don't think.
So the redheads that are hearing this are very happy right now.
Yeah, exactly.
They're part of history somehow.
There
So,
you go.
concerning Jesus's characteristics, is there anything more that you think we need to add on that we're missing?
His characteristics.
So we say potential from the shroud, the hair appears straight.
Yep.
So we're saying that Jesus would have had straight hair.
Okay. Well,
Do you agree, or is that what you're saying?
So it depends, right? So some people, it depends on a certain factor. So in some cases, the reason why it's so straight, some people think is because he was wearing a chin band that kind of made the hair go flat down. Mm-hmm. And he clearly has a ponytail that's in the back. Now, with the ponytail, it does look a little unnatural at times, right? And what some scholars have said is with the Sudarium of Oviedo, so this is the purported head cloth that Jesus put on it's separate from the shroud. They put it on his head as they carried him from the cross to the tomb. And in order to put that on, they know exactly how they put that on the man. So they had to put it on, fold it around, and then it looks like they pinned it into the back of the guy's ponytail, sticking it in place. And by the time they got to the tomb and took off the Sudarium, the blood had encrusted the hair stiff into place. And that's why the ponytail stiff into place even after they take off the thing and the sides of the hair. So that's one explanation for that. Yeah.
Yeah, Dale, that's very interesting. I think people would be intrigued to have a further discussion with you on this kind of topic. And I never got to introduce you as your podcast channel, The Real Seeker.
Yeah, Real Seeker. Real Seeker is with an S on YouTube. And then on my blog is Real Seeker Singular Ministries.wordpress.com. I wish I didn't. I wish it was consistent. I should have done that, but
well, that's good. At least the audience could find you by that route. So just a couple more questions.
Absolutely.
The headscarf. You had told me that they had actually found that headscarf in another location from the shroud.
Yes, exactly. It's called the Sudarium of Oviedo. So it's currently held in a place called Oviedo in Spain. Mm-hmm. And it's been in Spain since, and it has a fully known history. Everyone agrees with that. It's been in Spain since 711 AD. Before that, we can trace it traveling through Africa all the way back to Jerusalem. And it's never been in Europe or that sort of thing like the Shroud. And it dates back at the very latest. We have a historical mention of it in the 5th century AD, speaking of it as the Sudarium that was on Jesus's head being, kept in a monastery, a cave monastery of St. Mark or something like that in Jerusalem. Now, the interesting thing here is that we can forensically link and anatomically link that Sudarium cloth as having covered the same corpse, bloodied corpse, that the shroud covered.
Wow.
And yeah, and in that way we can link them and date them back to the location of Jerusalem specifically, and to the 5th century AD at the latest. Now, I'll mention something I didn't mention in the Bible study that I'll be mentioning in part 2. But there have also been limestone dust and pollen studies on both of these cloths. And in terms of dating, I'll mention one finding by a peer-reviewed. Marcia Boy is a world's expert in studying pollen grains and stuff like that. And they've discovered embedded in one of the blood stains on the Sudarium a pollen grain that can be linked to Jerusalem, and is actually associated with ancient funeral rituals that went extinct during the Great Crisis of the Roman Empire in the 3rd century.
Okay.
They stopped being used after the 200s AD. So this, and it's embedded in the bloodstain. So we know that this grain got on there at the original time the bloodstains went onto the cloth. So that means we can actually push the Sudarium back to at least 200 AD or earlier. And since it's been forensically linked to the shroud, that means the shroud dates to 200 AD or earlier. So that's an incredible finding.
You know, when I think of the shroud and them keeping these items, the linen cloth and the head wrapping. So Jesus resurrects. That's the main feature while Jesus is alive. Why would they want to hold on to these linen cloths and this head wrapping? What would be the significance of that? Jesus is resurrected. That's what we care about.
Yeah, so I think that's a good question. And look, we just to some extent we're just speculating. I can't put myself back into the heads of the disciples, but the best educated guess I would have is that I think they kept it for proof, to say, look, here are the guy's empty grave clothes. He resurrected from the dead. It's meant as proof. And there is some plausibility to this, because there has been some biblical scholars and shroud experts, granted it's a minority view, but there has been some experts arguing that the shroud was actually shown, such as in to the Galatians, in Galatians chapter 3, verse 1. It's argued that they saw Jesus Christ publicly portrayed as crucified. None of these guys were in Jerusalem in 30 AD. They didn't see the real crucifixion. So what else could they be seeing? And we argue, well, maybe Paul or somebody else from Jerusalem was showing them the shroud images as miraculous proof. Like, here's proof he rose from the dead. He left the cloth and he left these supernatural images proving he was crucified. So,
yeah, that would make sense, right?
I think
people are doubting the resurrection of Jesus. They are questioning with these different theories. And here's the shroud. Here's what he was in. He's not here anymore.
Yeah. I think that's the best explanation. It makes the most sense, kind of thing.
Thank you for watching this video. If you like what you just watched, click the subscribe button. And beside that is a bell icon. Click that. It will notify you of all upcoming videos. Also, if you like this video, click the like button. But if you don't like what you just watched, you don't agree, that's okay. Go into the comments, leave a comment. Let's dialogue and talk. Thank you.